All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I am pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Fiscal Year 2020 Final Report Guidance. So during these uncertain times, sustaining your work is more important than ever, and we know there are ways that we can help. So today, OAC Deputy Director Dan Katona and Investment Director Dia Foley are here to describe the changes the agency has made to the fiscal year 2020 final reports designed to assist organizations in navigating challenges presented by the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak. They'll also preview the agency's approach to managing fluctuations in state and federal funding that lie ahead. Now, before we get on to the main presentation, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, everyone in the call today is in listen-only mode. This just helps to prevent any feedback issues during the presentation. So if you do have a question, please send it through the Q&A box, which can be found on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. Operations and Public Affairs Director Justin Nigro is here to moderate the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your question during our time here today, we will be sure to follow up. Next, if you experience any audio issues or you have trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, please try logging off and logging back in. And finally, today's webinar will be recorded, and we will post the recording on the OAC's YouTube channel and on the COVID-19 resources page on the OAC website by end of business today. So if you can't listen in full or you want to listen again, you can find it there. All right, well, that does it for housekeeping. So with that, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming OAC Deputy Director Dan Katona and Investment Director Dia Foley. Dan, Dia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Katie. Hey, good morning, Dia.
Good morning, Dan, and good morning to all of you.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for being with us, or thanks for pulling up the broadcast here if you're watching us on the recording. As you can see on your screen, maybe you see me twice. I'm Dan Katona. I'm the Deputy Director here at the Ohio Arts Council. And yeah, with me is Dia Foley, and we're hoping to spend a few minutes that will be valuable with you this morning. We'll jump right into it. Here's our quick agenda, and we'll be moving as quickly as we can through the day because we know that you've got a lot of other things on your plate. We're going to walk through some of the final report updates that have just this morning been finalized at the OAC. Talk about those for FY 2020. Talk just a bit about recent developments at the federal level and some of the money that's coming into the state. We have questions coming in about that and budget fluctuations there. And we'll try and leave some time for Q&A as well. And I guess before we start, I'll just say, obviously, we're in an unusual time, and there are lots of challenges and folks dealing with different things. And we don't do too many of these webinars like this with staff, but we're doing one today because we want to be sure that we're as communicative as we can be about what folks are experiencing, and let you know that we're with you and we're thinking about you here as we're doing what we're doing. Obviously, we're teleworking as we have been. I think this is the end of week 5 here this morning on April 17th as we're recording. So we know folks are going through a lot. We know that Ohio is already home to the best arts organizations in the country, the most talented artists, the best teaching artists, and on and on down the line. But you're also acting as homeschooling parents and caregivers and other things like that. So just know that we're thinking about you. We're trying to think of things we can do to make your experiences a little bit easier and alleviate some of the pressure that we know that you're feeling in your organizations and your communities. We're going to keep doing that, and that's part of our discussion today. So let's keep going. Quickly, just a bit of context as to where we found ourselves as we launched into this new experience in the last month and a half or so. Just to refresh folks' memories, of course, we were sitting on a historic $34.5 million allocation from the state of Ohio in our 2021 budget. We did have over $1 million, which is a recent record high from the NEA. In terms of federal funding that became a part of those subsidy funds, all of those went out the door in grants, or going out the door in the form of grants, nothing spent on administration. The math was telling us that this past year, I think this is FY19 numbers, that it was 44-1, the leveraging of other dollars against our dollars. So a tremendous amount was happening as a result of those investments. And the number of grants was just through the roof. So over 1,000 total grants were awarded in FY 2020 to artists, nonprofits, and schools. It's kind of the context that we were operating under. As the crisis hit, I can tell you that the OAC had our first meeting internally back in February to begin to do some contingency planning and gaming out what might need to happen depending on how things proceeded at the state level and beyond, obviously. So we were fairly early thinking about what we might want to do. Probably you've seen some of these updates along the way, but again, just to kind of bring us up to speed on where we've been so far. It was back on March 13th, just a couple days after we launched our COVID-19 page on our website, that we proactively began pushing out partial payments to folks. This is something we've never done before. We had to do a little bit of internal some gymnastics internally to get those things to work through ARTIE, but it was done, and so 381 grantees received just over $3.5 million that had been approved for that money, but it was just still sitting in the coffers. They hadn't called it down yet. So that was huge, and we were able to push that money out into communities at that time. That middle part of March, towards the end of March, we continued with panel meetings. It was important to us that as we got to the summer review process, we got to our board meeting, we didn't want to be flat-footed in terms of going forward. So it was important that we kept having public meetings and we kept those review processes going to honor the applications that were in the midst of being prepared and coming in, and that there was work that was ahead of us that we wanted to be able to approve. We didn't want to be behind the game when we got to the summer and into next fiscal year. We did then also towards the end of March, many of you saw extensions on the deadlines for applications for off-year updates for folks. And so this recognized that you were home. Many of you, most of you, didn't have access to as much information as you may otherwise have had access to. It wasn't the best time to be doing data arts reports and getting all those figures together for us. So sustainability mid-size folks were offered the chance to just send in those final reports and exclude the data arts report. We'll just go ahead and make those awards based on your last year numbers. We extended that deadline out to the fall to get those data arts figures. We do need them, but we don't need them until quite a bit later. And folks for sustainability also gave till April 30th and to get those reports in other than April 1st. We're still waiting on a bunch of those. So if you're still thinking about doing that, it's April 17th, you've got some time, but those extensions were also relaxed to let that happen. And then here we are today on the 17th talking about final reports. And we'll get into that content here. Here's a look at our staff. And again, we're teleworking with all of you. This is what it looks like when we have our staff meetings now. Those of you who know most of us, maybe you see your friends in there, and just know again that we're working hard. Folks are calling in and doing their best from places where they are. Our main goals around these changes to the final report procedures focused and centered on these 4 areas. We wanted to have folks have earlier submission be possible. We'll talk about that. Wanted to make the completion process easier for folks, and we'll talk about that. We wanted to make things as flexible as we could around the changes that we know you're experiencing and things that we know are happening in communities, and that's a moving stream, right? It's evolving as we go here. And we know there's some survey fatigue out there, but we do want to capture just a tiny bit of data about the impact and what's happening and what's planned in that process. So I'll walk you through this first piece of things, and then Dia and I are going to kind of tag team and alternate. This was our big assumption going into today, into these changes, and so just want to unpack this kind of statement in black. Our assumption was that your organization, my organization, has made substantive changes to its OAC-funded project or programming in response to this COVID-19 crisis. For example, canceled, scaled back events, things going online, etc. So piece by piece, my organization, who are we talking about? It's really all of these programs, almost everything that the agency sponsors. You should probably see yourself in there. Sustainability, Arts Access, Arts Start, Arts Next, the Arts Learning programs, on down the line. When we say has made substantive changes, is that me? Is that you? Our sense is that probably yes, it is, but obviously we know there's a lot of variation in what those changes are like. So there's no particular filter being applied here that you need to be concerned about. We know there's a lot of variance. To its OAC-funded project, so certainly on a different part of the OAC's work, we're interested just sort of intellectually in other things that are going on in the state, but for the purposes today, with regard to final reporting, we're talking about OAC-funded projects in fiscal year 2020. This includes operating support, things that are yet to occur happening after the new fiscal year in 21, aren't sort of a part of our thinking today. That's going to be next year's final report, so we'll get to that. Things that are happening but are not OAC supported are interesting to us, but not part of what's being discussed today. This is OAC funded work in this current fiscal year. And then in response to the COVID-19 crisis, so our focus again is on changes that are being made or will be made soon between March 1st, let's say, and the end of June. Things that happened in the fall that were changes that we maybe haven't talked about yet, or again, things happening in the future are not really of too much concern to us at this moment. We're thinking about things that are in response to the outbreak, the state directives that kind of flowed from that, the social distancing recommendations that flowed from that. It's a wide net, but that's what we're talking about. And again, examples of those things are going to vary. Here's a couple that we know we're seeing lots of. I'm sure you've seen the same sorts of things, but there's no comprehensive list. There's no list of things that qualify and list of things that don't qualify. Your speed may vary, and we know that you know your community best and your organization best in terms of what should be offered. So with those assumptions kind of in front of us, you can keep those in the back of your mind. I'm going to let Dia start us off on our back and forth FAQs, about 10 of them. And just so you know, I think maybe Katie said this, but no need to be taking screenshots or furiously scribbling notes down. This is all posted on our website. The PowerPoint will be shared as well. We're recording as well, of course. So feel free to kind of sit back and listen a bit. And we'll see how close we get to answering your questions before you have to ask them one by one. Dia, start us off with number one here.
Thank you, Dan. The question is, should we try to reschedule our activities to occur before the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th? No. There's no reason to adjust your programming within this fiscal year. We understand that grantees have canceled or have had to scale back on their programming and activities. It is safe to assume that the state directives and restrictions on distancing, social distancing, and other measures will remain in effect in the coming weeks and months. And that will most likely prevent any rescheduling of events. We recommend that organizations submit their final reports now, and you'll be noting the expenses you incurred up to this point. This applies to all the programs that Dan mentioned in a previous slide, except for sustainability, which we will discuss later.
The second question builds on that. So thanks, Dia. Should you reschedule within the fiscal year? No. Okay, does the Ohio Arts Council expect you to extend out your project's end date to beyond June 30th in order to get those project activities completed and get your final report done? Also, no. And again, the reasoning for that is perhaps somewhat common sense, but we just think that it's much more to the advantage of the state and the economic health of Ohio that we begin to process reports now. Don't need to reschedule things in a way that's going to be complicated for beyond July 1st, with the expectation that the OAC won't fund you unless you do that. Receipt of your OAC funding in almost every case, it's not that we can't think of any examples where this wouldn't be the case, but in nearly every case that we can come up with, receipt of that funding is not going to be contingent on that rescheduling. So if things are being canceled in the spring months, March, April, May, June, again, as Dia noted, filing the final report now is our best advice, rather than delaying those things and asking for extensions. Does that mean that you should not reschedule things? Of course, it's great if you're able to reschedule things. We'd love for you to do that. We'd love for you to tell us about them in the final report, and we'll describe how that will happen in just a moment. But we would rather get that funding to you now and allow you to use it now than have you reschedule things for the fall or later in the summer and then have to wait to receive that funding until after those things have been completed. So we don't want to disincentivize that funding getting out now. And this is a question we've gotten specifically from folks on, hey, I'm moving my May concert to August. Shall I go ahead and extend out my deadline so I can accommodate that? Our advice is that no, you don't need to do that. We'll talk a bit in just a moment here about what may change about the way you file it, but in general, the advice is to file it sooner rather than later and not extend that end date out. And then building on that question, we have a note here to extend the conversation just slightly about that. In some cases, organizations with canceled activities are going to be able to apply OAC funds to work that just preceded the event, even if the event ultimately then did not or does not take place. And we recognize there could be some case-by-case discussion here that's necessary, but in general, our hope is that you're going to be able to proceed confidently into the completion of that final report, knowing that our expectation is to be as flexible as we can here. I'll point out, it's actually, if you want to go and dig for it, it's actually in your grant agreement. It's section 14 that discusses this potential eventuality. ARTS activities that are canceled, with a whole list of things that may happen, act of God, and so on. Epidemics is in there, causes that are beyond your control. The council is still obligated to make payment required to the extent that you incurred expenses in connection with the prep for that activity. So the marketing that's already occurred, the supply purchases that have already occurred, the folks who are still perhaps on payroll or receiving contract payments or that sort of thing, the personnel expenses that went into the prep for that or are still going into the prep for that, or the rescheduling of that, etc. Those are all, in almost all cases, going to be valid expenses that we want to see and we want to reimburse you for, even if the event ultimately is changed or moved or does not take place at all.
The question: due to recent events, our grant agreement no longer accurately describes the events we carried out. Does it need to be amended? In most cases, no. If you look at the text of your grant agreement, it is highly specific about events or activities that are going to be carried out, but have now been affected. It should be updated before your final report is filed. Again, as Dan said, if you want to review your grant agreement description, you'll need to visit the View Current Past Awards tab in ARTIE. You'll click Open under the Grant Information column. You'll see that your grant description appears in the third paragraph down. It begins with whereas between whatever the beginning date is and date, the end date, your organization will, and then the description follows that. If the situations occur where this no longer describes anything your organization did throughout the year, then probably a revision should be made. And if this is the case, or you aren't sure if your grant agreement needs to be revised, we ask that you send an email to me, and I will review the grant description and your explanation, and we'll decide then at that point whether or not we need to revise the current grant agreement. And in some cases, we may need to issue you a new grant contract.
The next question probably, again, hits pretty close to home for folks, and basically it's just, great, this sounds good. We're going to complete that final report now, but we're concerned about our access to resources or to that information. It's at the office, or so-and-so is in charge of that, and that person is unable to help. They've got other challenges right now in their life. How can we proceed? Does that mean we need to file for an extension or something else? Our data is not complete. Again, situations may vary a little bit, but our strong encouragement is that you attempt to make the best effort that you can and still proceed to file your report as soon as possible, even if there are some incomplete pieces. In some cases, there are going to be, there's some prioritization that will happen, and as you can imagine, having the most complete budget and some modicum of a narrative is probably the most important piece. But you'll see, and we'll talk in a second about some updates that have been made, but you'll see that we've made some accommodations in ARTIE to let us know that there have been some challenges and some things are missing that need to be filled back in later, and we sort of have a plan for that. We don't, I think in the interest of everyone's time, and especially given that it's still grant season, and I know that the coordinators and other staff members are really focused as much as they can be on the panel meetings that we normally are focused on here in the spring. We don't need you to call in and begin to go case by case, that here's a piece I have, here's a piece I'm missing. I think our best advice now is to go ahead and make the assumption that what you have is probably going to be sufficient, and allow us to make a determination as to whether it possibly is not. And again, extensions are sort of a last resort. So we would much rather have you give it your best faith effort, send in what you do have, and let us follow up to say, here's what we see to be missing. Things like activity locations, the participation figures that we need to report on out to our authorizers, to the NEA, and those folks are going to be critical. So those are things we would definitely circle back and solicit from you. But those aren't things that we feel like need to hold up your funding, especially if it's going to be critical to your operations, or it's going to help not lay somebody off or help you make the rent, or those kinds of things. Let's not get caught up in making those make or break. And I'll just say, this isn't printed here, but we haven't taken any questions away from the final report. The word counts and so on, those are intact, but it is okay to be less verbose than you may otherwise be. It's okay to, and you can just say this outright, hey, I'm missing some things here, or just go ahead and assume that our staff is going to be okay with that this year in a little different way than they might normally be. We'd love to see those great support materials and those pictures maybe that are on your jump drive in your desk drawer at work, or we'd love to see those evaluation results that you never quite got to compile because everything sort of came at you in March. We'd love to get those back in, and we'll give you a chance to do that, but we don't want that to hold up the process of processing of these payments, because we know that they're going to be critical now versus later.
Thanks, Dan. What if our organization's income during the grant period do not meet its one-to-one cash match requirements? We still encourage you to complete your final report and note any matching income as you normally would. We don't want to prescribe to you what the cash match should be. We know in good faith that you did try to expedite the process. So to give you a number or a percentage just probably would not help you in any way. If you do have any questions about a low match, then I encourage you to contact us to discuss that. Of course, a one-to-one cash match is always ideal, but we'll work with you in regard to a low match. And we are just looking for your good faith in submitting those figures. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to call me or your program coordinator.
Thanks, Dia. So we've somewhat covered this, I guess. It's somewhat duplicative, but when can we file that final report? The sooner the better for almost all grantees in all these programs that are listed. Actually, you can technically submit your final report anytime during the year that you want to. It does actually become active, when your grant agreement comes in. So as you get closer to the end of your year, you can always submit that. But the change is, of course, that we don't process it normally until the very end of the grant period. So normally it's 30 days prior to your grant end date that we might begin to actually do that processing. So for folks that have end dates during the year, of course, that date will vary. For folks with a June 30th end date, that's May 30th. So once in a while we get questions from folks, how early can I do it? We're done, our concerts, our last stuff, our last exhibitions concluded. Is it too early to process it? And the answer is typically May 30th. This year we are relaxing that policy so that for all grant programs, except for sustainability, it actually will be Monday, April 20th, that will begin processing those final reports. All final reports, whether they have end dates of June 30th or anywhere between now and June 30th. We'll go ahead and start processing those immediately. You can work on them over the weekend. I'd love to see 50 or 100 final reports in Dia's inbox by Monday morning. That would be awesome. We'd love to have the challenge of getting those turned around and getting those payments started out to you. We will work through them in as expedited a fashion as we can. Again, knowing that there's a lot of other things that are on our plate this time of year, but we've sort of begun triaging how that will look, and we feel pretty good about our speed there. A word about sustainability now, because we've been teasing you here. It is true that we are not yet able to offer this deadline or this early submission possibility of next Monday to those grantees, and that has mostly to do with just the size of the number of those awards and the amount of cash that's wrapped up in them. That's someplace north of 75% of our subsidy budget is wrapped up in sustainability. But know that we are working to get as early as a process as possible for those folks. We'll have those details out to you just as soon as we have them. I do not think it's going to be as late as May 30th this year. I think it's going to be somewhat earlier than that. And frankly, we're waiting for some guidance from the state on how we can proceed there. So I think it will be very soon. It could be as early as next week. It could be a little later than that. Obviously, we'll get that word to you the moment that we have it, and we're sort of ready to go as soon as we have our confirmation from the state about some of that. So there's nothing that we're waiting for that we're not prepared to be executing, but we can't quite give the green light on those awards just yet.
Will my fiscal year 2020 OAC grant amount be reduced? We do know that a state budget shortfall is predicted, and as Dan said, we are waiting to hear from the state regarding that. And what that would mean is that there might be some agency cutbacks at the Ohio Arts Council. But as it has been in the past under such circumstances, we are working with the state of Ohio to protect our existing awards. We'll go about that by diverting some allocated funds wherever possible. And then that way that would eliminate or reduce the amount that your award may need to be reduced. As always, if any reductions are ultimately unavoidable, the process for determining the new grant awards will be transparent, and we will be sure to share those with you as soon as available.
This question is just about changes that you're making and how to let us know about those changes, things that have been canceled or are being revised. So I mentioned earlier that we have made some revisions to the final report form. Those revisions went live this morning, so you can log in and see those at any time. Basically, what we've created is like I said, a brief survey at the front of your final report form that's under a tab that references the COVID-19 crisis. And we've added a piece at the end as you get to the submit tab that talks about the completeness of the report. Again, we know that I think if you're like me, your inbox is filling up with some other folks doing surveys, which is good. I know Ohio Citizens for the Arts has done some stuff. Americans for the Arts has done some stuff. That will continue, I'm sure, and I would not dissuade you from taking part in any of those, because I think the more data we can get out, the better. But we want a little bit as well, and we think that it will help us a bit as we try and kind of grapple with the magnitude of what's happened and how it is happening. Just a quick look at what those additions look like. This makes it look worse than it is, all the words on the slide here, but there's a section that talks about some personnel changes. Again, these are, we're hoping for estimates, and nothing here is required, and nothing here affects your award. But we're hoping you can give us some estimates on the number of folks with your organization, maybe who are staff, artists, teaching artists, or other contracted workers who may have been laid off or furloughed or had contracts canceled. We're hoping you can give us some sense of the amount of funding that's wrapped up in that. So funds that were budgeted but maybe now are not able to be paid to those workers. That will help us get a size and scope kind of feel on that. If you can give us some numbers around the number of activities or events that have been canceled or delayed or rescheduled or made virtual, you'll see that prompt. We have some questions about income. Again, these are just big round numbers. We don't need a big breakdown of all the different categories of places where you're seeing adjustments. But as we look at earned income and as we looked at contributed income, are you able to provide any sort of estimate, or what is your board looking at? What are you projecting right now? In terms of changes there. We assume that there are negative changes. If perhaps there's a positive change, we'd love to know that as well. And then we just have sort of a spot where we'd love to tell you, we'd love for you to tell us a little bit more. Just give us some words of wisdom about how your organization has been affected so far, how your community has been affected. What responses are you taking? Are there some places where you're serving in a leadership role within your community, or some things that you've tried? And then what are you thinking about as you look forward in terms of recovery? Are there some immediate things that are on deck? Are there some longer term things that you're thinking about? Maybe these are just questions that you're beginning to ponder. I know lots of folks were being flooded with online, right, with examples of things that people are rolling out. So we may have heard about what you're already up to, but we might not have. So we'd love for you to take a chance there and tell us a little bit more if you can. Again, none of these answers are required for the final report, and nothing here is going to affect your award or slow it down or speed it up or anything else. But if you can give that to us, that's great. If you have more than one grant out with the Ohio Arts Council, you don't need to think too hard about whether to enter the same information into the fields of more than one final report. But know that, as you might expect, we're going to sort of accumulate those as we go down. So if you have an operating grant, and you want to put everything in the operating grant final report and leave the project support grant blank, that's okay to do that. If you've got more than one project support grant out there and you want to sort of be specific with, here's how many things were affected for that project, here's how many things were affected for that project, and know that we'll combine them later, that's fine. You can leave us some notes again in that bottom field if you want to. Whatever is the easiest for you is going to be fine. We'd love to get that information. And then again, at the bottom, we mentioned here, when you get to that submit section of ARTIE, and you get to the end and you're about to turn the thing in for us, we'll ask you to give us one of 3 choices about your submission. And basically you're telling us if you believe that this final report is complete and everything is there, nothing's missing, it's just like any other year in terms of your access to data and completeness, then that's great. You can let us know that. You can also let us know if you think that there are some things that are missing and you do want to say, I'm turning this in now, but I do need to circle back and add in some things. That'll help us as we begin to open those guys back up for you to go back in and add some more things. We may sort of put you in that category on our own, whether you check that box or not, but that'll help us. There's also a third choice that lets us know when you circle back and provide more. Hey, I'm resubmitting this now. I think that it's now complete. So you'll see 3 choices. Probably it's the first 2 choices that'll be the ones you choose this first time through. I think it'll make sense when you see it, but just know there are some changes there. And again, it's okay to be a little bit less thorough in some of the boxes that you might normally spend some more time in. If there's just some missing pieces, that really is okay. And if it seems like it's just egregiously incomplete and we really have some issues, we can't process it, we will reach out to you and talk about it.
Have there been any changes to fiscal year 2021 programs? And that would be no. We still had all of our updates for the 2-year or 4-year programs. As Dan said earlier, the sustainability deadline has been moved to April 30th. And as of today, we had all of our deadlines throughout the course of the year. We are continuing to review those through panel meetings that are all virtual now. Our board meeting will be in the summer, usually in July, and at that time the council is preparing and planning to approve all of the recommendations that were made by our panels this spring. And they are also looking to allocate the agency funds as appropriate. And we are really looking forward to next year, and we hope that all of you are too, because we know that in light of everything else, that you will create some wonderful projects and do some amazing programming.
And one more for you, Dia, before we turn the page to our last section here.
Yeah, so I'm sure some of you may be asking if your OAC award included any funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. As of this year, fiscal year 2020, there were only a handful of OAC grantees that did receive funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. We did notify you, and all of those people should know that, and hopefully have been publicizing with the NEA's logo as well as ours. If you do have any questions about how to proceed with the final report process, for those of you who do have federal grant, you can contact me directly via email, and my email is there, dia.foley@oac.ohio.gov. So no need to worry about whether or not you wouldn't know that your grant was funded by NEA dollars.
Thanks, Dia.
You're welcome.
So we're going to move into our new section, but I do see some good questions coming in. I'm going to leave those for a second and we'll take them at the end, but hopefully this answers a good portion of your questions about the final report process and how it is being relaxed and modified a bit this year. At least that's the hope. Certainly if there are some things that we've missed, like we have said all along, we're continuing to make some updates, and there'll be at least one more obviously here related to the sustainability folks as that comes into focus for us, but we hope that this is helpful. I want to turn over in our last section here and talk about this question of new federal funding coming in, because I'm sure that there are some questions on this as well. We've gotten a few. Yes, we know that you've begun to hear in the press, and obviously it's been somewhat well publicized, that the National Endowment for the Arts did receive some federal funding. Those of us who were around long enough to remember the ARA process back in 2009, it's a little reminiscent of that experience, but there's some important differences. And if you're not old enough to remember that process or you weren't around, it's okay. That was not that pleasant of a time. So Dia and I were both here, so we can speak to that. But happily, it's a little different. Here's where we are with this. I'll describe our approach right now, and then give you a bit of data that I think helps explain the rationale that we are taking. So just some facts first here. Yes, the NEA allocated $75 million via the CARES Act, and of that, by law, 40%, so $30 million goes to state and regional arts organizations. There's states and territories and some regional, so it's not just 50 of us. Ohio is now slated to receive about $517,000 to help offset losses that we're experiencing. Our intent is to use those funds to bolster our ongoing support of existing grantees, not to create a new grant program or to develop anything new that requires you to apply to it. We believe that this is going to help, first and foremost, mitigate the damage of anticipated cuts at the state level. We'll see. Lots of reasons that we think this is the right way for Ohio to go. A few listed here. First of all, we can obviously make this, we can implement this immediately, essentially. It is administratively lean, so we don't need to spend a long time developing new stuff and working on new processes in ARTIE. That was a huge effort back in the ARA days, if I remember correctly. It's no new application process for you and no new reporting at the other end for you within the constituent world. And most importantly, I think it honors what we would see as our existing and ongoing commitment to the programs that are out there and the work that those programs support. We know that we already are home to the best artists and the best teaching artists and the best organizations in the state, and there's no need to go kind of shaking down the bushes for more of those. Here's a little bit more data I think that will help kind of portray the way we got to this decision. We talked about a few numbers at the top. Here's a few more. Last year, the final reports that all of our organizations turned in indicated that OAC funds were being used to support 183,410 artists. Or you might say OAC funds were used to support artists 183,410 times. You know, it may not be that number of separate individual people, but a huge number of artists. So we don't need to go seeking out more artists. They are already a part of your work. You know where they are, and they're being supported through the processes and the programs and the grants that are already part of our process. In terms of the breadth and the reach of those funding, you know that we're already making grants in all 88 Ohio counties. In fiscal year 2020, that's the second biennium that has been the case. No, the third biennium that's been the case. So there's no need for us to go and push, as we did with ARA, into new areas that maybe are not getting the right level of service or weren't served at all. We're in every county, which was not the case 10 years ago. And it's not just the same organizations year after year. In fact, last year in fiscal year 2020, there were fully 267 organizations who were new to the grant programs in which they applied. They weren't all brand new to us, some were, but folks are finding new programs. They're developing new in the world, and they're new to the OAC every year, not just by dozens, but in fact by hundreds. So we know that there's no need to go find new applicants or create a process to go and search out new folks, because they've already found us. You have found us already. Total OAC grants to organizations are up. As you can see, over the last 3 biennia, there's been a steady increase in the number of grants that we have pushed out. So we see this as more information that tells us we don't need to create a new process. We don't need to create any reporting burden. There's almost 250 new grants made compared to just 4 years ago. It's a huge number. And the same thing is observable when you look at the number of organizations that are receiving those grants. So it's not just more grants, but to the same number of folks, the same organizations. The same phenomenon is here as well. So again, over 150 more organizations received an OAC grant this year compared to 4 years ago. So a lot of folks and more year over year are accessing our awards and are getting support from the OAC, getting support from the agency. And then last but not least, this is just a look at our subsidy budget, so our grant making budget total over the last 6 biennia. So basically since the last recession wrapped up. so to speak, in fiscal year 2010. Blue, state funding in blue and federal funding in green. This is what it has looked like as we've seen this increase, slow but steady, to our record number this year in fiscal 2020. So you can see the difference in, first of all, how far we've come, but also the breakdown of how much help the federal funding is compared to the state funding. And again, that green number, that green bar at the top of fiscal year 2020, that's $1 million. So $500,000, which is what the state is adding right now, you can see how much or how little that makes a difference in light of the state's funding. It's not this way in every state, but in Ohio, we're just very fortunate that blue line is so big. It's a credit to the work that OCA does and that you do in the field, to the great work that we're able to talk about, and to the great wisdom of our legislators and the folks that on both sides of the aisle have heard that argument for years and responded to it and recognized the value of public support of the arts in Ohio. That blue line is big. So the green is important, and we welcome it, and it's valuable, but it's not make or break in the same way that the blue is. And I think also it illustrates that, you know, in terms of what programs are offered, what our values are underlying those programs, those values were the same by and large when you look back at 2012 and 13 and 14 and 15 as they are now. You know, the budget has more than doubled, but we have not doubled the number of programs. And so as we get this new influx of a little bit of cash, we hope that it is able to plug some holes. We anticipate those holes opening up soon. We hope that it's enough to plug every bit of the hole that we may encounter. And if it is, that's great. But if it isn't, we don't think that it's the time to create a new process with our right hand and fund new folks through a new situation here while we're making cuts over here with our left hand. We don't think that it's to your benefit to be asked in the midst of everything else that's going on to absorb and respond to a new application process that asks a lot of you when we've already got you. We already have you in the system, and we're able to use that money without a lot of strings attached from the NEA to just fill existing need. Some of that is different, again, than the RR process, and those of you who were around for that, I think we got around $350,000 back then in 2009, and I recall a quite arduous process that folks had to go through. It was jobs related, and there were a lot of specifics about the way we had to respond to that. Thankfully, this is just a bit different. The money is called down differently. We're in the process of getting it, and it will be available soon. But we don't need to go through that process from the federal level, and so we're not seeing a reason that we should force you to go through that process from the state perspective either. I hope that explains it a little bit. We don't have because we're still waiting again from some clarity from the state, we don't know for sure when those funds will be expended or what hole they will fill. It'll be 20 or 21 or a bit of both. If somehow there are extra funds available that don't need to fill any hole, then that'll be a great problem, and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's not our assumption right now, but we'll see as we go in the coming weeks here. Okay, that takes us through final report questions and then a bit about NEA questions. That's our prepared remarks, and I think we now have a few minutes for some questions. So I'm going to sort of turn it over to Justin Nigro and see if he can't guide us through some of those. Dee and I will jump in, and just know that if we don't get to your question today on the recording, we will certainly follow up with you and do our best afterward.
Thank you very much, Dan and Dia, for your remarks this morning. Hopefully that provides some clarity to everyone out there who's wondering how we're looking at the rest of FY 2020. So we do have a number of questions, and I'll start reading them through and then tossing them your way, Dan and Dia. The first is just a clarification on some comments earlier. It sounds like our grantees need to complete what they can, and then they'll be contacted if they're missing information after it's submitted. Will they be penalized at all if they do that, if they submit a final report without complete information and then complete it later? Dia, why don't you take that one?
Thank you. I'd be happy to. No, and there will not be any repercussion to your grant award. We honestly want you to just be honest in your final report and provide as much information as you can, and that will not affect your grant award or any grants in the future. Thanks for the question.
Thanks for your answer, Dia. Next, we have a question about a group that's pivoted their grant activities from in-person to online, and those activities will be taking place over the next 5 to 6 weeks. Should they submit their report now, or should they wait until after the activities have taken place? Dan, maybe you can take that one on.
Sure. In almost every case, the advice is going to be to go ahead and submit that report now. If there's some other reason that you would prefer to wait, of course, we're not going to chase you down for that. And there's the deadline for submission is not being moved. We'll still be happy to give you, off into the summer, as we always do, to complete things. But from our perspective, there's no reason to wait. We're assuming that money would be welcome now, as opposed to in August or September or something further out. So we would love to have you submit, describe the need to circle back maybe after those 5 to 6 weeks have passed and give us some more details. We'd be happy to have you do that. In the meantime, those funds can make their way to your account and start doing you some good.
Thank you, Dan. Another question, will awards be prorated based on the percentage of the project completed? For instance, if 2/3 of the project was completed, will we get 2/3 of the award? Or will something else happen? Maybe Dan, if you want to address that aspect of things.
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't think that's our intention. I think it'd be hard for us to calculate a percentage like that. So with everybody, and this goes for really all grants in all years. It's a tremendous. It's hard to take money back. We don't want the money back once it's allocated out to you. We'd love to work with you and find a way to make it 100% in every situation that we possibly can. So no, if there's a percentage of the project that was not completed, we'd like to find a way to honor what was completed, and again, think about directing that funding away into other parts of your operations, even if it's just operating support, as we can. I guess the one exception might be a really difficult match situation where there's just really low number there. It's possible that we can make an adjustment on the grant agreement to lower an award, but boy, that would be kind of a last resort.
And I guess it's worth tacking on, we addressed a little bit the possibility of upcoming state budget cutbacks given the revenue situation the state's facing. Those would not be directly linked to any sort of proration of how much, percentage of a project was completed. Do you think that's fair to say, Dan?
I do, yeah, correct.
Another question we've got, and I believe this has been happening sort of case by case. Maybe Dia, this is a good one for you. This is a Teach Arts Ohio grant, and obviously the schools have closed. Some teaching artists might have been unable to finish their projects in schools. What's happening in those situations?
I think Jared, the program coordinator, has or will be contacting everyone, but we want you to go ahead and submit your final report. Some of you have already received your money, and we understand that, but we are not going to reduce that grant because you were maybe not available to, or you weren't able to conduct those residencies. We know that a lot of residencies have been done virtually, and that's okay. And at this point, because so much is unknown, we do not want you to have to schedule the residency that you had this year for the following year.
That's great, thank you, Dia. Another question that just came in, will there be an issue if our final report is not submitted early? Some folks might have needs to submit them later. So Dan, maybe if you want to take that one on.
Yeah, no issue whatsoever. The end dates are not going to be revised if that's the way to look at it. So the end dates will live where they are. It sounds like many of them will be June 30th, and then we'll have a July 30th deadline. And so that will continue to be the case. We're not going to get upset if it's not able to be submitted early. We just assume that there's some funding in many cases, or most cases, that would do more good in late April or May than it would do in July or August. But obviously, yeah, if folks are grappling with their own institutional preferences or just other factors, that's okay with us, no penalty. Just an opportunity to take advantage of earlier if it suits your needs.
That's great, thank you, Dan. We have a question coming in from our live stream on Facebook. If most activities are moving to virtual audiences, are there suggestions or criteria rather that we should use regarding calculating participation numbers? that's an interesting, new, I guess, emerging question out there for grantees as things shift to virtual formats.
That's a great question. I don't know if I have the best answer. Justin, you may, or Katie, frankly, might. But no, I don't think we have any great best practice there. I think things that are live virtually, obviously, you can often flag a number and figure out what those folks were doing live. Sometimes, though, they end up being canned, and folks take part in them later. I think the guidance that you might have used otherwise with virtual performances and things like that will carry the day here, but I don't think we've published anything or given any recommendation on a particular way to track it. Does that sound about right?
Mhm.
That sounds about right. Yeah, I mean, we know that you can count the number of registrants for a webinar, views on YouTube, that sort of thing. So obviously, those numbers may be a little bit in flux this year, the way things are. But I think, like with most things, we're looking for your best faith estimate of what activity happened and how you've captured those audience participation figures.
Yeah, and it also makes me think, and I should have said this earlier, with regard to this kind of question, whether it's participation numbers or just the section of the report, of the final report that talks about COVID-19 and layoffs and those sorts of things. We know that this is a snapshot. And it's an evolving situation. So if, here we're asking you maybe to take advantage of a chance to submit it early, that may be next week or the week after. And if a month from now, there's still a lot of challenges and that number changes, that's okay. We don't need you to circle back and revise that number or send communication to us. Obviously you can. I think I'm already seeing Americans for the Arts circling back and saying, hey, if we took our survey a month ago, maybe take it again. It's okay to get us fresh data. We can't simultaneously get all the early final reports processed and push the money out, which is our first and most important priority, as well as simultaneously get a full, complete picture of the aftermath of everything. Those are two, competing priorities that don't go together. So yes, obviously a full, complete picture of everything, the full impact, that's going to be months, probably years away, and we recognize that. So there's no need to worry about the moving stream that I know we're all in. It's just an evolving situation.
Thank you, Dan. We have a compliment on not repeating the ERA process, so that's nice. Thank you for that acknowledgement. This should be, we hope that this will be a smoother experience than that was, and more easier and more efficient for everybody involved. We have a question. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say a quick word about that. I don't want to, we love our other state arts agency colleagues around the country. We learn a lot from them, and we think they learn from us, and God knows we steal from them if we need to, because that's the way we do it. But I do want to say this is the process that we're following is not what every state is following. So it's certainly possible that you may have colleagues in other states or contacts elsewhere, or maybe you've got some relatives someplace and what they're doing in Indiana or Texas or pick a state. In Minnesota, they're doing a lot of different things. Not everybody is following this approach, but lots of folks who are concocting new application processes, and that may be the best fit in their state. I don't want to say that ours is the only way that this can be made to work well. It just happens that we think in the situation that we find ourselves with some of the data that we presented to you and looking at what's available and what's going to make the most impact in the easiest way. I think that's where we landed. I don't want to badmouth anybody else's different choices.
I'd like to add to that I just would like to thank and give a shout out to the OAC's board and our executive director, Donna Collins, who have really worked with the staff to find the most flexible way that we can be to our grantees. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you both. Another question, I think I'll keep this one for myself. We're looking forward to next year. We're assuming the funding will not be as high as previous years. If that is the case, is there a percentage that you might be thinking it could be? And to be completely honest with you, we just don't know that information yet about what our state fiscal year 2021 budget will look like and any effects on grants. What we do know is that the state's budget office is currently revising revenue estimates for what they had expected in FY21 to what they now expect in FY21, and that process isn't complete. After that process is complete, I think everyone will have a little bit of a better picture, but obviously those are decisions that take a while to be processed and happen and then be conveyed and then for us to absorb. So we're kind of in the same boat as you, and we're just waiting to see what happens. So thank you for that question, and we promise to be in touch as soon as we have more information about what the future holds for FY21 grant amounts. We've had a couple more here come in last minute. Let's see. We've got one. Sorry, I'm having some trouble with seeing that one. See, another thank you for not creating a new grant program for the federal funding. Thank you so much for that comment too. We think this is the right way forward for Ohio, so we appreciate your acknowledgement of thanks there. We promised to answer any questions we didn't get to after the webinar, so we have them recorded in some format. So at this point, I think what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Katie Monahan to close us out and let you know some information here as we exit the webinar, and thank Dan and Dia for their time this morning to process this information. So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. That does it for today's presentation. And remember that a recording of this presentation will be available on the OAC's YouTube channel and on the COVID-19 resource page on our website later today. So if you missed it, or if you missed certain parts of it, you'll be able to catch it all there. There are also copies of the PowerPoint slide deck there as well. So thank you again to Dan and Dia and Justin for walking us through these adjustments. And to everyone who tuned in today, thank you so much. Have a great weekend and stay safe and healthy. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Be safe.
Thanks.